All right, Isak Pretorius. What a privilege to be able to introduce Isak to you. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Isak so you know the background. So Isak is the head of an organization called ForAfrka. And this is the organization that we choose to raise funds for at our Build Africa conference. ForAfrka is Africa's largest NGO. It was started 25 years ago by Isak's dad, the late Peter Pretorius. They feed 3 million children per day in Africa, and I think that's across like 7 countries or something in Africa. 3 million kids a day. It all kind of started when Isak's dad, Peter, was stranded in Pambara in Mozambique. He was there for whatever reason, a business trip or whatever, and the plane that he thought was going to be taking him home the same afternoon actually was only coming back a week later. So he was stuck in this little town in Mozambique, and in that week that he was there, he said he saw children die of hunger in the week that he was there. And he got back and he said to Anne, his wife, like, we live in another universe. There's children dying of hunger. We have to do something. And the story can be read in Peter's book. I think it was called Death Defying Faith. Is that right? If you can get a copy of Peter's book, it is a phenomenal story of how they went from there to 3 million kids a day. One of the ways ForAfrka describes himself is our work is done with Africans, by Africans, for Africans. They're an African organization ministering to African people. It is such a great story. Isak himself, having studied in business, having been involved in businesses, and having run the NGO for many, many years, he's kind of had his foot in both camps for many years. He's in fact the head of YPO South Africa, which is the Young Presidents Organization. It's the top business people in South Africa. He's the chairman of YPO. So he's got very strong business, and obviously grew up with his parents being pioneers in the NGO world. So he eventually did take over ForAfrka when his dad passed away, and is now traveling through Africa making a difference. And I'm going to ask you guys, I can tell you in advance, I'm going to ask you to dig deep and to make a donation to ForAfrka today. How are you going to do that is on the back of your lanyard card. So your name is on the one side. On the other side, there's a QR code. Just scan the QR code, and that'll take you to the donation page, and make a donation to ForAfrka today. So Isak, we so appreciate what you do. We're in awe of the sacrifice that you and your family have made for Africa. Please give him a round of applause as he comes up.
Much has been said about Africa.
I've never seen people in this kind of condition.
Stories that shape the way the world sees us. But most haven't seen the full story that we have to tell. Every day, we see the joy of children drinking clean water for the first time. The relief of a mother feeding her baby the food she needs to help her grow. Every day, we see Africa become. Because together, we are empowering it. People rescued during a natural or man-made disaster. Tools being used in a freshly planted community garden. A generation rising through education, with the nutrition needed to fuel their dreams. All families creating abundant sources of food and livelihood. We dance with entire villages as they create their own destiny. Not everyone can do what we do, but we are Africans, and this is our home. And the future of Africa is unfolding before our eyes. But it won't happen on its own. So together we work, risk, plan, coordinate, build, protect, provide, and love. We are Africans serving Africa. All of us working together to see an Africa that thrives. Our staff rush to assist those in need. New technologies are deployed. Tools are put to good use. Villages are built. Communities are developed. Lives are restored and dreams are awakened. From South Africa to South Sudan, Angola to Mozambique, we are on the front lines. When others go home, we remain. We are up before dawn, in the heat of the day and in the quiet of the village at sunset. See Africa as we do, where the full potential of the most abundant continent on the planet is being realized. Let's write a new story together. We are ForAfrika.
Brent's note number 11 said love. And I want to tell you that that's why ForAfrika exists. We are Africans who love Africa. We love our continent, we love our people, we love this land, we love its opportunities, we love what it stands for. We love that other than the colonial languages that were brought to us as Africans, our languages don't have a word for stranger. Doesn't exist, because there are no strangers on our continent. They're just friends we haven't met yet. And a culture you all understand, a culture of Ubuntu. I am because you are. We as ForAfrika are because you are. And the 3 million children or the more than 4 million people that we served last year, and all of what I'll share with you today is because you are. It's because of people like Steve and his wife and the EXP family here in South Africa have put up their hand and said, hey, we want to be a part of transforming lives. It's because of people like Brent who put their money where their mouth is, okay? And last year heard about what we're doing, and without saying anything, without making any big deal about it, made a massive contribution to our work that directly ensured that we distributed close to 1 million meals to refugees that were flooding in from Sudan to South Sudan, okay, as a result of the war that had just started in Sudan. Because of many of you who actually got on that QR code and said, hey, I'm going to do something. So I want to share a little bit about that with you today. You would have heard this proverb, many of you, particularly us here on the African continent, but it doesn't really matter where you come from in the world. You would have heard that if you give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. But if you teach him to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. Trust me, I've had this proverb quoted to me so many times, okay? You feed how many kids? Well, you know, if you give a man a fish, okay? Well, I want you to understand something, that the baby Zhao you see on your screen there, baby Zhao's life and his mother's heart would argue that maybe there's a place for giving fish sometimes. Because if the approach to baby Zhao's mother was, well, you know, I'm sorry your child's dying in a malnutrition clinic, but, you know, we're going to teach you to fish. unfortunately, the story wouldn't have ended with that picture, which is that same child just a month later. Okay? So baby Zhao's mother would argue that actually there's a space for giving fish, because baby Zhao would have died otherwise long before the fishing training was over and his mother had ever caught the first fish, sacrificing both a life and wasting a bunch of fishing training fees. So I ask you, is the answer really that we actually just abandon any form of direct support to people so that we can empower people by teaching them to fish? Or is the answer that we actually abandon teaching people to fish and rather just give charity to everyone? And I would say the overarching answer is no to both of those. I think that there's actually a place for both giving fish and teaching to fish. Giving the fish to sustain the life long enough for the person to learn how to fish. But I think maybe it goes beyond there. You see, in the work I'm in, it's amazing. I get to meet lots of people, and Steve's correct. I live with one foot in the business world and 1 foot in the humanitarian world, and it's an interesting place to live, because the chasm between the two, I would argue, is actually why people still starve to death, like some that I met in Ethiopia just last week. Is actually the chasm that exists between those two worlds. But it's interesting because I get to meet people from every space, people who are overwhelmingly successful, and then people who many call poor. I don't actually think they're poor, I just think they're poorly paid. Okay. But the interesting thing is that no matter who you meet, you hear about their plan for Africa. Oh, let me tell you about my plan for Africa. You know, I've got a plan. Well, I want you to understand something, that Africa actually has a plan for Africa. That the communities that we serve actually have a plan for their community. That baby Zhao's mother actually has a plan for baby Zhao. We at ForAfrika call it Plan A. And so how we engage with communities is not going to them and telling them, well, this is the fishing training that you need, and this is how we're going to teach you to fish, and then how you're going to fish so that you can succeed. Because that's not Plan A. That's Plan B, C, D, maybe Plan F, okay, for failure. Because that plan's not sustainable. Because what we actually do is we go and sit with the community and say, what's your plan? What's your plan? Tell us, what's your plan? You know what's amazing? Every community has a plan. Can I tell you something? They have amazing plans, okay? They have the same plan Brent had when he was sitting there not selling a house yet, okay? He had a plan to become one of the best in the industry. They've got that plan. So we listen to their plan, and then we take our expertise and we help them to refine that plan and develop the plan further out. And then what we do is we bring resource behind their plan. Because otherwise they accept our plan because it's the only one that has resources behind it. But the reality is that it's doomed from day one, because the moment we leave, the plan leaves. And so we rather get behind the community, understand their plan, refine their plan, and then resource their plan. And that way we're doing something that's sustainable from day one, because it's owned by the individuals that are going to make it last and happen and control their own destiny. I also think it's part of bringing dignity back to those who have lost so much because they find themselves where they do, poorly paid. Okay, poorly resourced. Cipriana is a mother that I met in Angola. I think I might have shared a little bit about her with you last year. This is a lady who actually is, or was, a successful farmer. She farmed commercially. She had received fishing training, and actually was a really productive farmer. Produced way more than her family needed, traded her commodity on the local market. She was an entrepreneur, a small business person who was succeeding, who was totally self-sustained and supporting her family. And then climate change or weather change or whatever your political preference to the word might be, okay, but the change in weather, let's just go with that, resulted in 7 years of drought in Angola, in the area that she and her family come from. And that meant that she lost everything. She said, first we couldn't grow, then we ate our seed, then eventually I left my home to come and live in a town to try and make money somehow to be able to feed my family. She says that to me as her severely malnourished young boy sits next to her, and she tells me how his brother already died from malnutrition. She said, I bring my children in early every night and close the door so they don't have to watch the other children in the neighborhood eat. She said, because sometimes we have a meal a day. For the last 3 days, we've had nothing to eat. This is not a lazy person. This is not somebody who can't provide for herself. It's somebody whose circumstances meant that she can no longer do that in the current environment. So Cipriana would argue that maybe teaching to fish isn't the silver bullet that we think it is. That actually there's possibly got to be something more than that. That if she was actually integrated into an environment where she was provided with a kind of finance, yes, like your businesses need, hers needs finance. And she was linked into technologies and irrigation. And ForAfrika had been able to provide the ability to actually irrigate a crop, okay, and guard against drought. That actually, going beyond fishing training to really facilitating true business, would mean that Cipriana wouldn't be sitting there. She would be farming on her farm, more successful than what she had been before. Say, does it work? Well, Thomas is a perfect example of the fact that it does. In fact, Thomas captures my story today. You see, the thing I love about Proverbs is that these really simple statements that have big meaning to them. The thing, though, is that building Africa is not simple. It's complex. And it doesn't require a statement. It requires an integrated development plan. A true strategy. The same as you would develop a strategy in your business, we have to have a strategy for transformation of lives, communities, countries, and our continent. And that's our vision. And Thomas captures that. So when we first met Thomas 4 years ago, 5 now, Thomas was extremely food insecure. Thomas was somebody who needed a fish. And so we gave Thomas a fish to keep him alive while we helped teach him to fish. And 2 years later, Thomas made $1,000 from his farm that we had helped him to start to develop. Okay? So now suddenly Thomas wasn't reliant on us giving him fish anymore. He had enough money to kind of just buy enough fish to feed his family. Well, what you see behind Thomas is the first brick home that has ever been owned by anyone in Thomas's family. Because last year, Thomas made $10,000. That's 10x, okay, in 2 years. $10,000 net, okay? Not selling homes, okay? But it did mean he built his own home, okay? As a farmer. How did Thomas get there? Because Thomas got fish to stay alive long enough to learn how to fish, but then we were able to take Thomas way beyond there. Because we believe that that's what Thomas deserves. And that by investing in Thomas, we ensure that we don't just impact Thomas's life, we actually transform the future generations of Thomas's family. You know what this man said to me? I said, "What's your dream, Thomas?" He said, "To make my farm big enough that I can send my children to university." Okay? That's his dream. He has a plan. Okay? And so how do we go about doing that? Well, what we do is, when the appropriate thing to do, when refugees are flooding out of Sudan into northern South Sudan, what we do is we go meet them there and we give them a fish. And we give them water. And we give them the basic things that they need. Shelter, place to stay, hygiene, okay? But then we don't stop there. And so then what we do is we actually immediately start working with that community on building a regenerative economy, on understanding what it is that we can do and how we can invest to actually get them to the point of self-sustainability. So phase one for us is going from whatever emergency we meet people in or whatever condition we find them to transforming that community by working hand in hand to getting them to the point where they're self-sustained. But I don't know about you, but when I was listening to the speech from these great notes, which I'm going to steal, I didn't hear anything about the goal being to just sustain myself. So for us at ForAfrika, because we love Africa and we love our people, self-sustainability is not a goal. It's a stepping stone. Okay? Thriving. If you read our vision, it says for Africa to thrive. Okay? Thriving is the goal. And so we then continue beyond there to actually start to provide farmer loans. We set businesses up. We teach people technical skill, and then we asset finance their business. You know that for $500, we can train someone, asset finance a business, and set them up to literally be the master of their own destiny. Okay? $500. Okay? But we do that in an integrated way. So what we do is we actually go and secure the big contracts, and then we push those contracts down. So practically, what does that mean? Well, one of the ladies I chatted to in South Sudan, in Juba recently, she was trained as a tailor. And then we asset financed her sewing machine and got her set up, and we brought her some working capital loan, okay? And then we went out and we secured the contracts to make all the prison uniforms, okay, and the school uniforms. And then we brought that contract and we divided that amongst more than 300 little businesses that are tailoring businesses that we've helped set up. And so now we guaranteed that they had their first contracts, and those ladies all now have businesses that are growing and transforming, and they're in different phases of being able to get to the point where the platform has been created for them to thrive. Asset financing a man with a tractor and equipment so that he can go and provide Uberized mechanized services to farmers like Thomas, who can't afford to mechanize yet on their own, but we've given them a reciprocal loan that has a voucher for mechanized services in it so that they can actually cash that in with a guy who now does exactly what they need to grow. Say, what's this got to do with Build Africa? Everything. See, I want to make a final argument with you, and that is this. Food security used to be a Thomas problem, or an Africa problem, or a rural community problem. I want to say this to you. If you read the reports I read about food security in America, you will start to realize that the future of food security might be a you problem and a me problem. It might be an America problem and a UK problem, not just an Africa problem. So I would actually go so far as to say that by investing in communities in Africa, whether that's providing immediate aid that's needed to keep people alive long enough to learn how to fish, or any of the other components, is actually an investment in your own future. I would argue that by investing in building Africa, you're actually investing in your future client that's going to be buying a home from you. To me, that's the vision we should have. Okay? Many of you in this room are African. That's the vision we should have for our continent. Those of you who come from elsewhere, I want to say, if you're not investing in Africa, then who is? Because they're going to determine the world that your children will live in. Because in 2050, 1 in 4 people in the whole world is going to be an African. We will be the largest community in the world, okay? And we will also be the youngest one. So we, each and every one of us, have a responsibility, I believe, to start facilitating the Thomases of the world. Why? Because that investment in Africa is going to come back to us tenfold, okay, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. And so what I want to say to you today is that while a lot of what we do looks and feels like charity, this is not about charity. This is about making an investment in transforming the lives of your neighbor. And I'm like Brent and Steve. I spend time in church, and I spend time on my knees and in my Bible, and I believe that that's actually our God-given responsibility, is to love our neighbor, to invest in our neighbor. Okay, it's why in Africa we don't have a word for stranger. And so that's what I'm asking you to do today. I'm not asking you to make a charitable donation. You'll get a charitable receipt, so the tax man will make a charitable donation, okay? What I'm asking you to do is to invest in people, to invest in the transformation of lives on our continent, to invest in the future history of Africa and the world. And I want to give you a guarantee that through our proven process, we will ensure that the community we start with today is self-sustained in 4 to 6 years and is given a platform to thrive beyond that. That's the promise that I can make you. That's the return on investment that we can give to you. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for your support last year. Because of your generosity, we raised over R1 million last year from this room, okay? Now, if you think what 10,000 Rand does in transforming someone's life by setting them up with a business, or the fact that keeping Thomas alive for a year only cost just over $90, okay? Imagine what $100,000, okay, or 50 that was raised here did last year, okay? So that is the level of impact that you have when you say, hey, we want to be a part of ForAfrika, join our family, be on this journey together. And then the last thing I want to say to you is this, and this has got nothing to do with anything else, but while I was sitting there, Brent, you were speaking, you said something, and I want to pick up on it. You spoke about getting on your knees. And I'm aware that some of you are in a position today where you don't have the luxury of supporting someone else because you're trying to just support yourself or your family, okay? And I've been there. I've maxed out my personal credit card to pay my staff their salaries, okay? I know what it's like to be there. And I want to reinforce that the single biggest tool to solving that problem is getting on your knees. Okay. My son was playing in a rugby tournament the other day, and his whole goal was to play provincial rugby last year, and he finally made the provincial team, and then he was playing in the tournament, And the first game, about 20 minutes into the game, he dislocated his thumb really badly. And he tried to play for another about 5 minutes or so, and he just couldn't. And they brought him off the field and went and saw the medic. And we were sitting with the medics, and the medic looked at his thumb and he asked him to try and move it and do whatever. And then he looked at me, the medic, and he said, he's not going to be able to play for the rest of the tournament. Like that, in fact, you need to go to the hospital. I think the thumb's probably broken, not just dislocated. And my little guy with tears in his eyes looks at me and he goes, Dad, I've worked my whole life, he says, as a 12-year-old, okay? I've worked my whole life to get to here. I can't not play. And I said to him, dude, there's only one solution. If you want to play, you're going to have to pray. Because that thumb's a mess. And tomorrow it's going to be worse. And he agreed. So we went to the hospital. We did what we had to do. And then when we got back to the dorm he was staying in, we sat in the car and we prayed. And the next morning I got there really early to go and see him. And I said, how's it doing? He said, Dad, they said if I can touch there, I can play. Well, look, okay. And he played the rest of the tournament. And in fact, he won 2 awards and he ended up in a touring team. And it's a whole long story of what happened as a result. But why I'm telling you that story today is many of you are sitting here with a dislocated thumb. And you don't know how you're going to play tomorrow or pay tomorrow. And I think if there's only one thing you take away from this whole conference, everything here is awesome. I mean, listen to this man and follow what he's telling you, and it's hard not to succeed. But if there's one thing you take away from here, if you want to play, you better pray. Okay? And if you don't know how to do that, ask some of us here. We can introduce you to the guy who makes it happen. Okay? So, God bless you.
Thank you, Isak. Amazing. Okay, so just before we close for lunch, so Danielle is my beautiful wife who I was married to for 24 years, 2 days ago or 3 days ago. We were clever enough not to get married on Valentine's Day. We took a trip to Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. We went to Rwanda last year because we'd raised a bunch of money for Africa, and we wanted to go and see the work that they were doing. And I love the way that Isak tells the story because he introduces you to a couple of individuals. So we met Thomas today, and when we were there, you're not going to be able to see it, but the home screen of my phone is a picture of a little dude who we met while we were there in one of the schools that they support. And I put it on my phone because it reminds me that the money that we give to ForAfrika, it's not going into some black hole. It's going to a little kid with a name. So I want to ask you, have you ever given sacrificially? Have you ever given when you didn't have the money to give? Have you ever taken a risk and given something away for the good of others? I'm going to ask you to do that today. I'm stirring you to decide what you're going to give. And if it's only 50 Rand that you can do 50 Rand. Scan that QR code during the lunch break and make a donation to ForAfrika. Okay, God bless you. Isak, thanks for joining us this year.